area. And the purpose of this conversation is to provide a space for all of you, as well as to engage with the panelists and to start thinking about the ways that not only this election affects the communities that you guys are immediately a part of, but also the way that this election could affect us moving forward from the November 3rd election. So just a reminder, this will be a recorded session, and we're also going to be doing a Facebook Live event for this particular conversation. And and before we begin, we just want to emphasize that that we just simply so excited to be providing this space for all of you to be participating in our conversations. Throughout our conversation today, at first we're just going to have a moderated discussion where I'll be asking the panelists a series of questions, hot topic questions that many of you, I'm sure, have been asking. And secondly, we will have an unmoderated part of the conversation. So after that moderated part, you guys will have the opportunity to either raise your hand, ask your question through the chat, send your question directly to me, and participate in this conversation. So, and also just be on the lookout throughout the chat, because we'll also be just sending random questions that if you guys feel so compelled to answer, just to see what you guys' thoughts on certain issues are. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the panelists. So first, we have Nneka Achapu. She is the National Census and Civic Engagement Coordinator at Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and she's also the founder of African Public Affairs Committee, AfriPAC. Her professional experience ranges from many years in the medical field as an interpreter to cross-cultural communications, consulting, and government affairs. Her work has been recognized by many organizations where she has given her insight as a speaker on cross-cultural communication, ethnic identity, inclusion, and diversity. She has been very active in the African community in Houston, serving on numerous nonprofit boards and volunteering her time with the community. She has served on the boards of World Refugee Day, Discovery Green Park, AfriPro, and she is the Africa Subcommittee Chair for the International Trade Committee on the Greater Houston Partnership. So thank you so much, Nneka, for participating in our conversation and for being here. Next up, our next panelist, we have Jonathan Trujillo. Jonathan Trujillo is a current senior at Yale University and a recent summer fellow with the Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo. Passionate about uplifting the Latino voice and youth empowerment, Jonathan has founded the Yale Latinx Business and Leadership Student Association and has co-founded Tejanos by the Bayou, which is a new organization in the Houston area that empowers the Latino community to enact progressive change and build a pipeline for future Latino, Latina, and Latinx civic leaders and activists in Houston. And intending to leave his mark in the Latino community, he intends to go to law school in the future and represent his community one day as an elected official in Texas. So all the best of luck to you, Jonathan, and thank you for being here. Awesome. Next up, our third panelist, we have Amatullah, Contractor. So Amatullah, Contractor is the Civic Engagement Director for Emgage, Texas. Emgage is a family of institutions that seeks to empower Muslim Americans through political literacy and civic engagement, through efforts such as political education initiatives, engaging with elected officials, and our historic Million Muslim Votes campaign. Emgage works to maximize the impact of Muslim American communities and demonstrate the inherency within American politics. And Amatullah, throughout her work, she has advocated diligently to be a champion of her community through advocacy work. She wants to ensure that everyone has equal opportunities and an equal voice in our representative democracy and a sustainable environment for a future. So thank you so much, Amatullah, for being here as well. Awesome. So next up, we have Deborah Chen. So Deborah Chen is an immigration attorney at the law offices of Deborah Chen, an associate and a longtime community activist for the past 20 plus years. She's an expert in small minority women disadvantaged business enterprise, and she has also been an active member of the Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI, community since attending the University of Texas at Austin, and advocating for an Asian American Study Center and the importance of UT to consider the needs across students in this particular demographic. So she currently serves on the board of OCA-Greater Houston, a chapter where she co-founded the Houston AAPI Film Festival Committee and co-organizes the OCA-Greater Houston Advocacy Center, monthly citizenship workshops, pro bono legal resource guide, and biannual National Asian Pacific American elections, as Xavier Houston cites. and further other efforts. So thank you so much, Deborah, for being here. And lastly, we have Angelica Razo. Angelica is the Texas director for Mi Familia Vota. Angelica moved to Houston to pursue her undergraduate degree at Rice. And during her time at Rice, she served on the leadership team for the Hispanic Association for Cultural Enrichment at Rice and was part of several Center for Civic Leadership programs. So Angie joined Mi Familia Vota in June 2016 to lead youth leadership programs in Houston. Her work involved creating opportunities for Houstonians to participate in civic action, understand community issues, and create relationships with their elected officials. So now, as a Texas director, she's still passionate in understanding how community empowerment leads to positive, sustainable policies in social issues. So, so with that, we want to thank you, Angie, for being here, and thank you again once more to all the panelists. All right. So now, the part that you guys have been waiting for, we're going to begin our moderated conversation. And our first big question that we want to ask, and Ms. Nneka Achapu, if you don't mind being the first person to answer, and then anyone else can jump right in. What are the issues at stake in the upcoming election?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this very great panel with very great colleagues doing excellent work to engage our communities and ensuring that we all going out to the polls this November. And actually, some folks have already started. I mean, I think the tally is up to 700,000 people in the last few days. I may be wrong, but quite a lot of people have already started voting here in Texas, here in Harris County. So there's a lot at stake for immigrants, I would say, all the way from the last 4 years, what has been occurring in the immigrant rights space, from things going on at the border, all the way till public charge, all the way to what is currently happening with the racial and social injustice space. So there's a lot of concerns for the community, at least in the African immigrant community, onto what is occurring and the needs that this community has in terms of changing the tide, or at least being more active in what's going on and being participant of the laws and regulations that are being brought forth. So at least for the Black immigrant community right now, a lot is at stake. It's almost survival as far as making sure that everybody is aware and informed and out to the polls for vote for this early period, and of course on election day. So there's a lot at stake. Because we're a C3, I am having a difficulty in saying all the things that we've been going through this last 4 years while staying C3 PC. So yeah, there's a lot at stake, and we're trying to push everybody to make sure that they are engaged, ready. We've held quite a couple of voter registration drives, coupled with the census. It's been an interesting 6 months in fighting to get everybody accounted for. And we've seen with this administration how many times we've had to go to negotiate the right to be counted, all the way till the last day, which unfortunately everything was shot down before. So we're fighting for a lot. If you ask me, this is one of the most important elections of our lifetimes. And what is at stake? Well, livelihood is at stake. A lot of people's livelihoods, the economy, COVID-19, 220,000 deaths. This is what I know that my community is fighting for. A lot of our people are frontline essential workers, and finding themselves having to deal with how this administration has handled what has been happening. And I feel that a lot of our community members are seeing these things as, why is this happening? Why don't we have any control over it? How can I get involved? And we're steering them into, well, the only way you can actually start having a voice, and this is not only for presidential elections, is to be completely involved, engaged in what is going on, all the way from school board, all the way till what is now happening, which is a presidential election. We have to continuously be involved with what is happening in politics because it affects us. So I hope I didn't take too long to answer this question. Thanks.
Great answer. Any other panelists, feel free to just jump right in.
Yeah, Juan, thank you so much for moderating this important discussion. Thank you for our amazing colleagues that are here on the panel with us and the Alliance for putting this together. I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have. Completely agree with Nneka on all the issues that she mentioned. And I would just emphasize the moment we're living in right now with COVID-19. I think this election is really important because it's really the outcome of it is really going to decide how do our communities fare through COVID-19 and how will they be able to bounce back or transition to a new type of normal that we see as we recover from COVID-19. My sister works at a bank and I was talking to her this weekend and she said some people are doing really, really well right now with COVID-19. If they already had wealth accumulated, they're really taking advantage of that, and some people are doing really bad. And so I think we're at a pivotal moment in history where are we going to let those who are already marginalized become even more marginalized, have less access to healthcare, have less job security, less economic stability, less access to quality education? Or are we really going to take a stance and through through elections, through voting, really center community, center the needs of our community, before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID, and really create a new landscape for the way people are living their lives so they can actually thrive and prosper. So I'm excited. I'm really excited for the historical voter turnout we're already seeing in Texas, particularly from young individuals, people of color, immigrant communities. And I think they really are going to be the deciding factor, and they're bringing their issues to the polls, and we're seeing that already.
I just want to add one thing. Thank you to the Alliance for having me here today. I agree with everything that Angie and Nneka have said. I would just like to also state that, we're living in an environment and time now where the communities are being scapegoated for different things, right? We're being blamed for just being here, and specifically for the Asian community. In the time of COVID, we're seeing a rise of, just anti-Asian hate. And not to say that this hasn't happened before in the past, because it has. It's just now it's suddenly okay by public officials to even, exacerbate those type of tensions, right? We're living in a time where we have an opportunity to make different changes in society. We see this happening in other communities with the rise, with what's happened with George Floyd and all the different inequities and all the different injustices that we have seen or we've talked about over the years. It's like everything's come together and happening at this time, all at the same time. And so that, again, is another reason why this is our opportunity. It's an important year for us to make change and to really, and it's not just this year. It's every election, actually. And at least for the Asian American community, it's so important for all of us to actually participate, regardless of who you choose to vote for, but to actually participate and vote. Right, to actually be looked at as a community that's important and enough to be counted and enough to be taken seriously, and are the issues that impact our communities to be taken seriously. And I think that that transcends across all of our communities, right? Because our communities, I believe everyone here is from a 501c3 organization, right? And we all have people in our community who are from both sides of the aisle. And I am constantly telling people, like, I don't care which party you belong to, because we need people in both parties, okay? Whether there are pros and cons to both parties, right? But we need people from our communities to actually participate, to be able to make their voices heard in both parties, so that when the time comes for decisions to be made, then our voices will actually be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and I just want to add like a little bit. Nneka started off this conversation by mentioning the census. And, you know, essentially that's what's at stake this election, our right to exist. You know, every person on this panel, we've been, you know, going to like the smallest corners of the city, of the state, to find members of our community and make sure that they're counted. And with shifting dates, shifting regulations, questions about, you know, the citizenship or who gets counted in the census, that makes our job difficult but so meaningful, because we want to make sure that, you know, they don't, well, we want to make sure that no one, especially in our government, has the right to erase us and erase, you know, the evidence, like essentially evidence that we exist in this country and we are a part of the American fabric. And that is really what's at stake here, our right to exist.
Yeah, just to add on to that, yeah, I completely agree. I think what we're choosing between now is whether or not we're going to embrace our immigrant backstory, or if we're going to you know, continue isolating ourselves from the world. It seems like the current president seems to not only want to limit immigration, undocumented immigration, but all sorts of immigration. He just does not want the country to keep changing. And I think that's really important to consider, especially when we're looking at our communities. And I think it's particularly in the Latino community, the issue of undocumented immigration and what we're going to do with those citizens and how we're going to treat that segment of the population extremely important. Just here in Houston, there's over 400,000 undocumented immigrants, many of whom who've been here for you know, countless years, and have no pathway to citizenship, have no pathway of doing things the right way. So I think although we have one presidential candidate who has not have a clear position on immigration, on what he's going to do with undocumented immigrants, Joe Biden, I think it'd be significantly easier to work with him in terms of getting things done. And I think it's very important that we select the candidate that will give many citizens just an access to do things the right way and get legalized.
Awesome. Thank you for the responses. The following question, I mean, just from you guys' responses, we can all agree that voting is important. You know, voting is important, and especially from our communities. So what would you say to this question? How do we get out the vote in immigrant communities? And Amatullah, would you like to go first?
Sure. The answer to me first, it's very like, if I can put it in the simplest way, it's outreach. For years, you know, every time I call someone, you know, just to get them out to vote, they don't know what's going on. They don't know what candidates are on the ballot. They don't even know where to vote. And that's because Texas makes it very difficult to vote. There are just so many obstacles you have to go through just so you can make it to the ballot box. And you know, if we put in a little extra effort just reaching out to these people and having a conversation, they're willing to talk. They just need to be paid attention to. And think for years, because no one has reached out to them, they don't feel like it's their responsibility to go vote. And it is, you know, up to us to really remind them and do our part that, hey, you know, this is how you can vote. This is how your vote matters. And this is how we reach out to them. And, you know, getting them, and if you reach out to one person and make them enthusiastic about voting, they will bring their entire families out to vote. They will tell all their friends, they will tell their entire family, and that is how you expand voter outreach. You just have to reach out to someone.
Well, to follow on that, we should just simply have a much easier registration process, right? So many community organizations end up having to waste their time just trying to get people registered. Simple as just making it available online. There are other states that do this very simply. It would save money on paperwork alone. Just let people register online, right? You can renew your driver's license online. Why can you not register to vote online? You know, then community organizations could actually spend their time doing more meaningful work of actually educating the community about, what these are the different issues, or this is the process, especially for, immigrants. The Asian American community here is like majority first generation. So you're talking about a lot of people who didn't have the benefit of going to school here in elementary school or middle school and learning about, this is the process and this is our structure and whatnot. We could be spending so much more meaningful time educating people about their rights and responsibilities. Like, it's a responsibility of every citizen to vote. It's a basic responsibility. It's not just a right, right? But instead, we waste time just getting people registered. Countless amounts of money spent on paper applications when it could just all be online. Very simple.
Yeah, I agree with both of those answers. And then also making it relevant and personal to people, right? And understanding who is the best messenger to do that. I think, you took all of the panelists here and we were speaking to our respective community members. The conversations would look somewhat similar, but then somewhat different. And that's awesome. That's great. That means, we know the folks that we're talking to, we know how to engage in them. We know, language, but also slang and particular issues to bring up, right? But I want to emphasize, it has to be personal. It has to be relevant to people. Just simply telling people they need to vote and not, allowing them, not taking time to, spend time to engage them and educate them, like Debbie was saying, on why voting impacts their life beyond November 3rd, right? What happens after November 3rd? Hopefully we get to talk a little bit more about that. But that's, those are the most fruitful conversations I've had with folks when they say, oh man, this is why the Senate race is important to me. I didn't know they had so much power, or, something that the Senate did in 2018 is currently impacting my life right now. Because people are angry and they're frustrated. And then they're also content with certain. And it's about, taking those emotions and funneling them into, okay, this is the impact it's having in my life. This is how I can show up at the polls and actually impact election outcomes.
Yes, I don't know if I can chime in here, but I agree with Angelica and what she's saying. For the Black immigrant community, for example, I feel that because it's something almost new, whereas they've never been engaged into voting, we're always having to come up with, look, this is more than becoming a Democrat or becoming a Republican in this new country of yours. This is about the laws that govern what is happening to us as a community. And therefore, please make the effort to vote. And same thing with, there's a lot of folks that are in mixed status families where people feel that just because one person can vote, that the other person who may not be able to vote cannot assist or be not part of the process. Having that conversation on why it's so important on behalf of those who cannot vote to vote, I think is very powerful. And we're trying to do everything, at least at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, to involve non-voters in doing little things, phone banking, text banking. Those are things that people can't do without having to exercise the vote. Driving somebody to the polls, waiting, I wouldn't say waiting in line, but at least bringing someone to talk to wait with, even if they're not able to vote. I think that is something that people can consider when having that discussion of why is it important to vote? Well, because if we're not represented, then nobody can change the things that are happening around us. So just thought I'd add that.
I think the issue of mixed status families is very important to bring up, especially in the Latino community, because there's so many young American citizens who come from a mixed status family and aren't really instilled, I guess, the idea of civic engagement from an early age just because their family members can't vote. So I think targeting young people is very important, and that's why I think organizations like Mi Familia, Vota, and Joel are doing amazing work getting the young Latino population involved, because there's just it's a sizable portion of the population. And I think at least here in Houston, I think the median age of US born Latinos is somewhere around 19 years old. So it's a very young population. And if we're not reaching out to those people and people who just graduated from high school and making sure that they vote, we're missing out a lot of the influence of the Latino community.
And I don't know if I can add this, but I want to emphasize that this mixed status family is in all communities, Asian communities, African communities, Hispanic communities. It is everywhere. And I feel that that is an issue that we often don't address, that all of the issues that immigrants generally go through, whether they're Latino or not, we're all facing it in the same proportion, in the same capacity. It's just how it's communicated that unfortunately it's only one group over the other that gets highlighted. But there's a lot of mixed status families everywhere. So I just wanted to add that.
No, great comment, great comment. Perfect way to segue into the next question. So, you know, from the conversations and the responses that you guys give, there's a clear distinction that among immigrants, you know, all immigrant communities, there's a lack of education, maybe a lack of engagement. And, you know, a lot of people think that once November 3rd hits and once we find out who the next president is, who the next Senate, who the next Congress people are, that everything is going to get fixed. What is your take on that? After November 3rd, what is next for our communities?
Redistricting, right? We don't know when the results of the census are going to be, you know, come out. We don't know yet if, you know, immigrants will all be counted and included when, you know, districts are being reapportioned. And those are things that are going to, you know, directly impact, you know, our communities for the next 10 years, if not setting a precedent for, you know, the next century potentially. So, you know, those are the immediate next things that are facing our community. Other issues, depending on, you know, whose administration it is, you know, the issue around immigration reform, you know, and how our communities have consistently been used to divide each other instead of, you know, working together on a unified front. And, you know, how different communities within the immigration community are kind of cherry picked of what's going to be a priority over another, right? I'm personally for comprehensive immigration reform, you know, which in my mind includes a pathway to citizenship for, you know, all undocumented immigrants, but at the same time does not sacrifice our family-based immigration system. A lot of people, you know, come here and want to have their relatives be able to come, right? And to me, it is unconscionable in a way where we're going to say, well, I'm so sorry, you're now of a certain age, and so you are no longer my child for immigration purposes, or you are no longer, you know, my parents for immigration purposes, or I'm sorry, you're my brother and sister biologically, but you're not my brother and sister as far as, you know, immigration purposes are concerned. I think that's very short-sighted, and it goes against the values of family that this country was, you know, founded upon. It's kind of inhumane in a way, right? Where we're going to deliberately tear families and relationships apart. And so I say this because usually when immigration reform is brought up, then they start cherry picking. Well, we'll keep this part, we'll add this part, and then we're going to get rid of this part, or we're going to cut back on this part. And I would just say that, you know, if and when this, you know, issue does come up before Congress, that our communities are all united, that we want comprehensive immigration reform that doesn't sacrifice families, and that includes, you know, a pathway to citizenship.
You know, like Debbie mentioned, I mean, the fight continues because no matter who the administration is, we're pulling a seat at the table. We just have to figure out whether it's going to be easier or harder to do that. And we have to make sure that every sort of, you know, I feel like we're at a point where, you know, disadvantages in our system, we have the opportunity and the resources to do something about it. And so, you know, as no matter who the president is going to be, no matter who our local, you know, state, federal elected officials are going to be, we have to start engaging them and make sure that, you know, they're held accountable to the promises they made when they were running. And, you know, even if they didn't, we have to go there and talk to them and have a discussion on how we can, you know, move the needle forward on making progress for our communities.
Yeah, I think the fact that I think this recent president definitely woke up a lot of people in the Latino community as to what type of person can get into power if we're not paying attention. And I think there are a lot of people who are going into politics who are paying attention to politics now because of the recent president. And you know, I see someone like Mailin Ballot, who's explicitly said that she ran for office after Trump became president. And I think this is definitely, I would hope that this would keep us on our toes and would make it so we not only, you know, vote for president, but, you know, stay active and stay involved. And I think that's why organizations like Tejanos by the Bayou are popping up, where we're a group of recent college graduates and college students who are all interested in public service and who want to, you know, find a way to like keep public officials accountable and to represent for our communities. And I think it's very important that after this election happens, we don't go away and we do keep paying attention and we do keep you know, pushing forward issues that matter in our communities.
Yeah, I definitely just want to emphasize everything that folks are saying. And I think it's about continuing to build community power, right? Again, I'm really excited about the surge of voter turnout that we're seeing in Texas. So we know that a lot of new people are joining the movement. I think organizations like the ones present, I think part of our responsibility is to keep them in the movement and provide community members with opportunities to engage and to roll out their new initiatives. So I think a lot about how young folks are really interested in climate change, right? And want to build a better future and want to have a sustainable green future for generations to come. And that's an issue that they're voting on. And I hope that, at the local, at the state level, and at the federal level, they're holding elected officials accountable, to the values that they want to see in positions of power, to the policy, the sustainable initiatives that they're going to be rolling out. And I think it's really bringing people into the space of what is accountability, what does advocacy look like, how do we continue to build that community power so that we're not just starting, we don't want to make this transactional, right? We don't want to reach out to folks once every 4 years. We want to bring them into the space with us, have them be present in the conversations that we're having with decision makers. And I hope that excitement that we see just continues and really allows us to have, great voter turnout in 2022, 2024, and then let's go back to the census in 2030. Let's be prepared for the census, right? Let's make sure that, our communities are not at risk for undercount. So there's just so much opportunity after this election to keep, our communities energized and have them fight for their own, for the issues that matter to them.
I believe that was everyone then. So we still have slightly over 20 minutes now, and those were the three main questions that we kept hearing and circulating through social media. And we actually want to open up the floor to the audience members. Feel free to send a question through the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. We'll be on the lookout for that. And I actually believe there was a question from earlier that I can address now. So Kim Wen asks, how does someone support immigrant minorities without speaking the language and knowing what their primary concerns are?
volunteering or being involved with organizations that do have people who are working with those communities, right? You know, there are many different ways to support. You can volunteer, you can donate money, you can do a lot of the work that people don't see, right? I'll give an example. Like right now, our organization is out there since September. We have a goal of 200,000 doors that we are lit drop canvassing to get information out to people of color communities and the Asian American community. You talk about people going out to drop the bags, but then there are the people in the background who are, stuffing those bags, right? The people who are collating the papers, putting the labels on. Those are just some minor things, to people who believe in the work that us and other organizations are doing. They're, donating money, they're joining as members. So there are multiple ways to support. It's not necessarily just the one-on-one. That seems to be easier, right? There are other things, like if you're at home, you can, look at any of our social media and, retweet out, reshare, repost, go through your own, contact list, contact and call each of your friends that or text everyone to say, hey, have they gone to go vote, right? Do they have a plan to go vote? What day, what site, what time, do they need transportation? Every single person can be involved in supporting one way or the other.
And I'm going to be a little bit shameless here. The Black Alliance for Just Immigration has partnered with the Leadership Conference on a campaign called Black Justice is Our Justice. And our goal in this campaign is really to galvanize Black immigrant communities and the folks that are going to be one day eligible to vote. And we're doing so by connecting through some, like Debbie mentioned, we have Outvote as a tool. It's an app. If you go to blackjusticeisourjustice.org, you can sign up for updates on how Black Alliance for Just Immigration is organizing Black immigrant communities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Debbie on, identifying the organizations that are working with different minority communities, communities of color, immigrant and refugee communities. I know the Alliance, y'all work with, just so many different communities that speak diverse languages. I think it's awesome that Houston has so many diverse languages represented. And we don't have language accessibility for all those languages, right? We don't see 140 different languages when you go to the polls. Like, we don't have ballots in all those languages. So language accessibility is still something that, we need to work on. And then I would say more of from an organizer perspective, if you have friends that are bilingual and they are the main translators and their family interpreters for their parents that may not speak English, talk to them. They can probably tell you, like, sometimes I have to serve as a translator at a clinic, or I have to serve as a translator when, my parent that wants to vote can't find information, or, when we go to the bank, and you can get an idea of what are the different barriers that exist when it comes to languages.
I want to share a quick story about phone banking to like immigrant communities. This actually happened yesterday, where one of our phone bankers called someone whose English wasn't the best, and she kind of quickly picked up on the fact that, this woman spoke Bengali. And so because our phone banker spoke Bengali, she quickly changed code, code switch to speaking Bengali and explained. And it was like an elderly woman who was like, I'm not going to the polls, I'm too old. And she was able to really explain to her how we have in Harris County curbside voting or drive-through voting, and on the phone through that language she kind of made plans. The voter she was talking to made plans to connect with all her elderly friends and actually go and vote curbside. And I think that that's really important. Like Debbie mentioned, that there are so many ways where you can actually support spaces where we have phone bankers or canvassers, organizers who speak many different languages who can do that kind of outreach. And it's really important to like elevate and uplift them and make sure that they have the resources they need to reach out to their community and people who speak their language.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a very useful way of supporting immigrant communities would be just to work as a poll worker, especially if you can speak Spanish for the Latino community. I'm currently working as a poll worker, and there's so many times where I end up walking a elderly woman who can't speak English very fluently just through the process of voting, and I think just doing those types of things are very beneficial for the community. And then I think there's also like a lot of ways to get involved at the local level. You can definitely see, keep up with city hall meetings and Harris County Commissioner Court things. And there are a lot of times where they give opportunities for students and for community members to get involved and have some say into the process. And I think a lot of times local politics is overlooked, but it can be very impactful, especially in terms of setting a precedent. I go to school in New Haven, and one of the things that activists in New Haven have been able to do for immigrants in New Haven is they got every New Haven immigrant who wasn't documented some form of ID. And I think things like that go a long way of moving the conversation forward. And so there are definitely a lot of things that you can do at the local level that can bring about positive change, and that can be used as a springboard for bigger things.
Great, great. The next question we have is from Javier. He asks, with the technological divide faced by our immigrant low-income communities, what else can we do to encourage voter participation?
I don't think there's any one way that works for everyone, right? That's why different community organizations try so many different ways to reach people. Traditionally, campaigns will say that you have to reach and contact somebody 8 or 9 times before they actually go and do something, right? Like they've got to hear about it, in one way, shape, or another. And before, we all thought that it had to be that in-person, contact, right? That one-on-one conversation. But then, COVID has happened. And so it's forced all of us to be, creative and try to, and it's also actually training everybody in our society to be more comfortable using things online and having meetings online to the point where people are tired of being online. But I think what it does do is it has really forced everyone to experiment with doing things differently. And so part of this election cycle is really going to, for many of us who are working in this space, is a way for us to see what is, going to be more effective, or what worked, what type of messaging worked in this type of environment. So I think it just goes back to every person is different, and each person is going to respond to something differently. Some people respond better on the phone. They need to have that conversation. Some people need to have that one-on-one in person. Other people are like, if they get a bunch of texts or they see things online enough, that's enough to motivate them. And then, peer pressure, I do think is the most effective, is when someone is spoken to or spoken with by someone that they know, right? So, for everyone here in the audience and anyone viewing this, really, if you were to go and text somebody or call someone in your own personal list, that's probably going to be more effective than anything that they receive from anyone else who's a stranger, because you are that trusted individual.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the past 6 months have really challenged us on how creative we can get. And as grassroots organizations, I feel like we're constantly stuck in the middle when we're talking to our community members and we're like, look, it's easy, it's accessible, like, you know, we're gonna help you through the process, it's confusing, but we're gonna get there. And then on the other end, we're looking at the system, we're looking like, this is horrible. Like, why are we still running, you know, why do we still need people to be VDVRs to register folks in Texas? You know, why do we need, you know, why do ballots need to be printed and or the application, why do these systems exist? And so I've struggled a lot with like, you know, when I'm talking to a brand new voter, I'm like, oh yeah, like we're gonna get this, we're gonna walk you through this, it's super simple. And then like furious, you know, when we're talking to our elected officials and advocating for better systems. And so I think it's both. It's yes, let's roll out new strategies, but let's also identify the barriers that exist and really challenge you know, our elected officials or the decision makers in those areas to do better. And also like talk, you know, subtly talk about that with our community members so then they start challenging those systems. The amount of times that I've spoken to, sorry, let me back up. Familia, Vota, we have a hotline, so we received calls from all over the state of Texas, people that wanted to register to vote. And the very first question we would ask them was, do you have access to a printer? And 90% of the time it was, no, we don't. So then we would have to figure out how we get a voter registration card sent to them. And then, you know, for our older folks, okay, they wanted to vote by mail. That was the safest way that they wanted for them to vote. Okay, do you have a printer? No, I don't. Okay, how do we get an application, just the application process sent to you or for you to have access to that? And so it, and I've had conversations with other, you know, people who have printers at their house who can run to CVS and grab postage stamps. And they were just like, yeah, I mean, like somebody just needs to get a printer. And so what I say, what is an inconvenience to you is a barrier to someone else. So let's identify those barriers. Let's call them as is. And let's elect people that are also willing to challenge the status quo of how we run voter participation. And so it's just, I feel like I'm constantly like two-faced. Yes, it's simple. Why do these systems still exist? And it's very hard because the tech divide still exists in the state of Texas.
I have to really agree with what Angelica just said, right? The mail-in ballot request, it used to be you could email it, you could fax it, right? And then suddenly it was changed to where, oh yes, you can still email and fax it, but by the way, we're requiring you to mail in or drop off the original application, which completely defeats the purpose of faxing or emailing. That's, in my opinion, that's just a deliberate way to make it harder for people. All these systems that are put in place that we have to tell people in the community, here's how to do it. It's easy, it's simple. But then yes, inside we're just seething like this is completely inane and inefficient and an instance of you know, suppressing the vote when it could, you could just, it boggles the mind when you can go and get a driver's license, renew your driver's license online, right? But you can't register to vote or get your mail-in ballot that way. And yet that ID is what we're requiring people as one of the IDs to have in order to vote. So it's layer upon layer of things to make it harder.
I just want to add, Angelica and Debbie, you guys have it like right on the nose. One of the things that I've been trying to figure out in the past 6 months is, you know, we tell people, you know, voting is our civic duty, it's a responsibility, but how do we make voting fun again? And you guys highlighted all of these barriers. I mean, to me, I think, you know, paying for like 5-6 stamps, right? One to send in your mail-in ballot application, stamps to put, that's a poll tax to me. Having to put in so many of your personal resources that you might not have just to vote. You know, many people, especially in our communities, are living paycheck to paycheck, and you know, they shouldn't have to end up spending so much, you know, of their own resources just to cast their ballot and make sure they're counted. And yeah, that's something that, you know, I still struggle with, and I think that we're slowly learning and becoming more creative in how we can, you know, motivate people to the polls. But yeah, we want to make voting, you know, something that's, you know, of course a responsibility, but something that people are very passionate about, that everyone's, you know, excited to go vote because they know they're making a difference, and we shouldn't make it, you know, such a stressful job for anyone to go to the polls.
Yeah, and just sorry for the remainder of the panelists, but just for the sake of time, let's move on to the next question, but I'll let those two panelists speak first. So the following question, there's actually two questions that are very similar, so I'll just ask a combination of both. How can we as audience members increase our involvement in politics beyond voting? And what do you think are new advancements of civic engagement? So either Nneka or Jonathan, please answer first.
Yeah, so I think one of the ways, just get involved with a local organization, and just, I think going about it alone can sometimes be a daunting task, but I think going about joining an organization where you can even build some good friendships and just around people who are like-minded and who have similar interests is very powerful. I think that's why we founded Tejanos by the Bayou a couple months ago, just because we felt like there is going to be a demographic shift in Houston, and Latinos are going to account for a big portion of that. And we want young Latinos interested in progressive change, who are kind of building on one another and helping one another navigate how to best bring about change. And so I think one of the ways is just getting involved with a local organization. And some of the other ways why I mentioned is going to city hall meetings, go to Harris County Commissioner Court meetings. I think Harris County Commissioner Court meetings are very important. And I think a lot of people underestimate the influence of Harris County. And I think Lina Hidalgo is doing a better job of kind of highlighting the influence that Harris County has, but it's a very big entity. And in some cases has more influence than even City of Houston. But yeah, so I think just getting involved in any way is very important.
That was great. I think as far as communities wanting and people wanting to find out more, what after elections, right? That was the questions. I guess education, that's what we're going to be focusing on in terms of how we can continue to educate our community about why they should be involved in politics in general. And just like Jonathan mentioned about local communities, I think starting afresh from the base of Commissioner's Court, finding out what's going on at the ledge. We have a legislative session happening in January, starting in January, finding out what these representatives are up to in terms of the laws that they want to put up. I think that's a great experience for people to find out, how to politically get involved. Same thing with mayoral elections. I know that here in Houston, we're far away from it. We still have 4 more years, but getting involved in local politics, I think, is a good segue into knowing a little bit more beyond presidential elections. And then I know I was reading another questions that was posed regarding how do we get refugees community of people who are citizens who come from a refugee background. I wanted to answer that before I bounce off to the next webinar. It's education. And I know that it sounds very generic, but having that very basic conversation of, hey, basic civic information, why we go to the polls, how the electoral system is made up here in the US, why do people have to vote, what representation. I think that education has to be given. And I think we try within our organization to talk to our communities, or to get to meet them where they are in terms of how they can relate to all of these things and why they're so important to them. So to the person that asked, how do I get refugee communities who have the power to vote to be involved, I think is getting to their level and understanding what, getting someone that can speak their language to explain, hey, this is important because just like when Amatullah it talked about, the Bengali person on the phone, I think having that relation, that personal touch of knowing the other person's language is very vital. So that's what I wanted to share.
I want to add one thing to that. So we filed a lawsuit and won against the state. so that everyone who is limited English proficient has the right to safely go to a voting location and bring somebody to be a translator or an assistor, right? So you can bring somebody, so long as they're not your boss and they're not your union rep, to help you vote, to whether it's to operate the machine or to translate for you. Someone who is has a learning disability or who is unable to read and write, they can bring somebody to come and help them. There are voting guides out there that have been translated into different languages, so that if there's a language that that particular refugee speaks but just can't read or write, someone can read it to them and explain it to them and then take them to help them vote.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everyone is saying about getting involved, what local and state politics. But don't put the burden just on yourself. Y'all, this is really confusing. I also, to be honest, I don't know the last time I sat in this Houston City Council meeting, because we all have lives, right? Y'all have classes, y'all have your own professional lives. You cannot keep up with Houston City Council, Harris County, the state ledge, and the federal government. You just can't. But some organizations, we all have our own area of expertise. And so I'm just really thankful for my colleagues here that are holding down the fort in some really important social issues that we don't have capacity to do as an organization. So one really great way that you can get involved is stay plugged into our newsletters, because come 2021 with the state ledge, we will be having what we call calls to action. And we need folks to let their state representatives and their state senators know we want fair maps. We want people of color represented in redistricting. We're going to want access to quality education. And we need y'all to contact your elected officials, hopefully in a very simple manner, provide testimony if you have the time, we can prep you. So use us as resources as you're, gaining ground and understanding what's happening in local and state politics, because, we can't be the sole voices for our communities. We need folks like y'all who are really impacted by these issues, who are living this day to day, involved in this process. We are simply a medium and giving you the opportunity and avenue to get involved. But I hope you don't feel burdened now. You have to go home and memorize all your elected officials and what they're doing on a day to day, because it's confusing. And at another time, we'll have a conversation about how somebody mentioned we demystify the process, and that's a larger systemic issue that we have to tackle one day. But definitely use us as resources, and hopefully you'll get involved into our calls to action, because there will be plenty to come after November 3rd.
I think I couldn't have better ended it in any other way. You to the audience, you heard it here, folks. Get out and vote. That's the biggest takeaway from today's call. And there's plenty of ways to get involved. The November 3rd election is arguably the most important of our lifetime. And we want to provide you, the Alliance wants to provide you with more resources. So I actually compiled a series of voter education videos for anyone that needs them. The first link, and for any other news related to voting and civic engagement, also click the second, thealliance.texas.org/news. I want to thank you so very much to all the different panelists that joined us today, to the audience members that asked their questions, and to everyone who simply is dedicated to making 2020 a year to remember. And again, we can't thank you guys enough. Please, please, please keep pushing on, continue on the big fight. November 3rd is not the final day. This fight keeps going. And just like all these panelists said, there's plenty of ways to get involved. So make sure to check them out on social media, follow them, and get involved. Thank you all.